Hello and good morning, CTS266 Section 840 students for the Spring 2016 semester at Anne Arundel Community College. This is the Cisco Networking Academy CCNP Switch course, and this morning's video tutorial is going to be on Discovery number 17, where we're going to take an introductory look at port security. In fact, this is the last Discovery activity of the semester. All right, so here is our topology in front of us. We're going to be dealing with PC1 and PC2. And taking a look at some port security settings. So let's go ahead and jump in here. The first thing we're going to do, and it's interesting, it's a little out of the order of operations. However, I understand what they're trying to drive home here. So if we start out on switch and we go from user exec to privilege exec into global config, if I were to say do show run interface Ethernet 01, you can see that literally the port is a switch port mode access, and that's it. So no port security on this port right now. And that is what we're going to make happen here. So I'm going to say switch port. Oops, sorry about that. Let's first get into interface Ethernet 01. And then we're going to say switch port, port security. Now it's interesting. They have us hard code a MAC address in here of all A's. So we say switch port, port security, MAC address, and then quad A's dot quad A's dot quad A's. Now, here's the interesting thing. If I were to say do show port security, you can see that we have no ports in the port secure state. There are no secure ports listed here. And this is one of these order of operations notes that you need to make sure that you're aware of. Until I actually issue the switch port port security command by itself, the switch port port security is not in effect. So I can add all of these switch port port security MAC address, switch port port security maximum, switch port port security violation. I can add all that configuration onto the port, but until I actually type in switch port port security by itself and hit enter, none of these features with the port security are going to be on. So let's pull that back, because they want us to say switch port port security maximum 1. Now, what's also interesting is that this is the default. So if I were to go Control U and come back and say do show run interface Ethernet 01, you'd see that there's nothing here that says switch port port security MAC address, or I'm sorry, maximum 1. So if I run that command now, switch port port security maximum 1, and then if we look at the port again, you'll notice that there's nothing there. And this is, again, one of those instances where Cisco iOS, typically, I'd say the overwhelming majority of the time, when it's a default setting, if you set something to a default setting, it's not going to show up in your running config. So we just ran the switch port port security maximum 1, and it doesn't show. What if I had said switch port port security maximum 2? Now that's not the default, so now we see right here that switch port port security maximum 2. So let's change it back to 1, and let's do the do show run interface again. Again, there you go. It disappears. So our default is 1 MAC address is allowed to connect per port. Now, I like how the lab points out that if you were using some sort of a like a daisy chain, like if you had your PC or your Mac or whatever plugged into an IP phone, then you would need to make sure that you have more than 1 MAC address allowed, because remember, the phone is going to show up as well as the PC or the Mac or the server, whatever's plugged into the phone. All right, so now let's see. Now that we've run those commands, if I say do show port security, do we have port security on? No, we still have no ports that are listed as being in the quote-unquote secure state. So let's go ahead and do that here. On step 2, they basically want us to say switch port port security. Now this is the command by itself. When I hit enter, I have now enabled port security on this port. And right on cue, you can see that we're going to end up with a series of messages here. Sorry about that. Let's get back to the switch. You're going to end up with a series of messages here. So this is where we hit enter right here. And so the first thing we get is a syslog message, right? We've got our mnemonic here, the air disable. We've got the severity level, and then the facility, excuse me, the port manager. And we see that it's a P secure, so port security violation, air detected on Ethernet 01. So it immediately moves the port into an air disabled state. Now, what we don't see here, or I should say here in our configuration, what we don't see in our configuration right now is the command switch port, port security, and violation shutdown. Because that is the default. Just like when we ran that command right here, the switch port security maximum 1, it doesn't show up when we do a show run because it's the default. It's the same thing. If you don't choose a different violation mode, excuse me, a different violation mode, or if you don't choose any violation mode, the default is going to be to shut down. In other words, air disable that port. So then we come down here, we've got another message here, port security, we've got our facility, our severity level, and then the mnemonic P secure violation, caused by, and here's the MAC that showed up on port Ethernet 01. However, this this MAC right there, the all A's MAC address, that's the MAC address that's allowed. And in fact, remember that switch port security port security maximum 1, there is only one MAC address allowed, and it must be all A's. You can see here clearly that the PC does not have all A's as its MAC address. So the port is changed to the down state. So let's run a couple commands here, and now let's see what we have. So we ran that switch port security command, which when we now say do show port security, take a look at what we see now. Very different from what we saw up top. So here, before I said switch port security, we see that there are no secure ports listed, no count, no current address count, no violation count, no action listed. Now, we've typed in switch port security and hit enter. We see the maximum secure address count is 1, right? The default. The current address count is 1. Now, the current address count just means how many addresses have been seen on this port. The security violation count, well, we've had one security violation. It's right up here. Security action is our default, again, of shutdown. And as you can see, here is the port, Ethernet 01. So we've got the port and then a listing of what's going on, right? How many addresses are allowed, how many, what's the current count, how many violations, and then what is the action, right? And we'll talk about the protect, restrict, and shutdown here shortly. All right, so now we're back onto the port. If I were to say, do show IP interface brief, you can see that Ethernet 01 just shows down. Now, it's interesting. Remember, the default mode is shutdown, but it's not going to administratively shut down. It's just simply going to air disable the port, and then we're not going to be able to see, we're going to see that the port is down. We're not going to see any traffic on the port. So let me go ahead, let me go ahead and quit out there. So now another very handy command is if I were to say do show port security, address interface, Ethernet 01, and let me make sure I've got this right here, show port security address, and that should be right. Do show port security address. That's not the command I'm looking for. There's another command where I should be able to say, it can't be VLAN 1. No, that's that same command there. And let's actually pull up a real Cisco switch here, and there is a command that I should be able to run, and it is usually show port security address, unless I've got this backwards. Yeah, I may be forgetting show port security, or is it show interface? Show port security, not address, interface. That's it. Show port security. There we go. Okay, so it's show port security interface, and then I could list out FA 106, right? This is a port here. So let's go back, and now that I've got the right command, keep that command straight there in my head. So show, and then we're going to say port security interface Ethernet 01. excuse me, you can see here that we get a listing of kind of what's going on this port in terms of the status. So if we take a look here, you can see port security is enabled. What is the port status? Well, it is secure because port security is on. However, it's shut down. And what is our violation mode? There's the default violation mode, which is shutdown. We don't have any aging configured here. So like it'll stay shut down for 5 minutes and then roll back. This is absolute. So no aging enabled right now. Secure static addressing, aging is disabled. Maximum MAC address is again 1, total max 1, configured max 1. Sticky, and we'll talk about the sticky, and this is where we allow the switch to learn based off the source address in the layer 2 frame header. And so when we enable sticky, it's basically going to be whatever's plugged in or whatever gets plugged in. As soon as the switch receives the first frame, layer 2 frame, it's going to investigate that source address in the header, MAC address in the header, and that's the address that's going to be used as the sticky MAC address for port security purposes. Now, you'll also see here it shows us the last source address in the VLAN. And so this is the guy here that caused the error, and that is the VLAN in which this activity took place. And so we've got a count of 1. So again, very straightforward and very easy to kind of see what's going on here with port security. All right, so now let's go ahead and step down to, no pun intended, well, let's move on to step 3. I was going to say step down to step 3. So, excuse me. Okay, so we're going to step down to step 3, and we're going to go to the PC. We're going to go to PC1, and let's see, can PC1 send traffic at all across this port. So let's say ping 192.168.0.163. So again, the port is down because the port has been air disabled. And it's not allowed. Traffic from this MAC address is not allowed. And in fact, even if I were to plug in another host, the port is still in an air disabled state. Even if I plugged a host in that had MAC address all A's, the port is still down. In order to get the port back online, and in order to be able to send traffic again, we would have to do a shut, no shut, right? And we'll get to that in a second. And we've already done the show port security interface Ethernet 01 command, and we talked about the output there. So now let's go back to our switch here. So now we're going to take a look. We took a look at shutdown. Let's go into global config. If I can get into global config here, interface Ethernet 01, and we're going to change the violation mode. So I'm going to say switch port security violation restrict. And if I back up a little bit here, if I do a question mark, excuse me, there are the 3 modes. Now, I'm going to be quick to point out that in the text, table 10.4 in our text, the Foundation Learning Guide, you'll notice it doesn't mention protect. It mentions restrict and shutdown. And so I've actually verified that it's not, that I believe is a typo. I checked 15.2.4e code as well as 1502 1 or something like that. So I've checked a couple 15 code releases, and protect is still there. So protect, restrict, and shutdown, those are the 3 options we have in terms of what action do we want the port to take. So the default action, if I don't specify one, is going to be shutdown. It will put the port in an air disabled state. And then we have restrict. And you'll remember from the reading that restrict is going to do a couple things. It's going to increment the violation counter, and it's going to generate a syslog message, right? That message that we saw earlier. And then finally, protect, which is the least restrictive. Protect is not going to issue any kind of a syslog message, right? It simply just isn't going to let you know that there's been any kind of a violation on the port. So let's see what happens when we go, we go switch port violation restrict. Now again, excuse me, remember that to get the port back to the status that we wanted it to, we have to say shut. We're going to bring it up and no shut. Now, what's going to happen is we should get that error right away again. So there we go. So there's the syslog error with that port security to psecure that we get right here. And you can see that we also get it again down here. It's going to repeat. So now we're getting this message. So here's the facility. Here is the severity. Whoops. So facility, severity of 2, and psecure violation. That's our mnemonic to help us out. And then we have a nice explanation here. Security violation occurred. And you can see that this is going to be a recurring message, right? That this message is going to continue to show up to the screen. So now let's go ahead and see, when we have restrict as the violation mode, does traffic pass, and actually we'll just pull that command back up, will traffic pass through the port? So again, we've got restrict on. Now we're also going to check here in a second to see, you can see the traffic is not going to go through. So back over here, if I were to say do show port security interface Ethernet 01, take a look at the status. So remember, the previous option we had, it said secure shutdown, or right here it said secure shutdown. Here the port status is secure up. Violation mode is restrict, and port security obviously is enabled. Now, the security violation count. So this is what I was talking about. Every time it senses a violation, which it's going to in the restrict mode here, it continues to increment our violation count. So we're all the way up to 15, so it should be 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. We're probably going to get one more here before I get the cursor back in there. So it should be 20 or 21 when I run that command. Actually, it's gone all the way up to 28. So we're all the way up to 28 at this point, and you can see that that security violation count continues to go. Now, if I were to say do show, sorry, let's pull this back here, do show IP interface brief, you can see that we are not down. In fact, the port is up. It's just that frames from the PC that's plugged in, those frames are simply not going to get forwarded on because we've got the device locked down to what we call a static secure MAC address. So there's basically 3 kinds of port security, right? Or 3 types of port security with respect to the addresses. You've got the static secure MAC address. We've got a dynamic secure MAC address. So static secure is what we have right now. And if I click back in here, do show run interface Ethernet 01. So this is static secure because here I have statically defined the secure MAC address I'm going to allow on this port. So that is static secure. Dynamic secure would be that we just simply allow the switch to make the decision, or I should say to learn the address that's plugged in, and that would be dynamic secure. And then the final method or type would be the sticky secure, which is where not only does the switch learn it, but it gets added to the running config, and we can save it, and it would be there across reboots. So as we saw over here, let's transition back to the switch tab real quick, and you'll see that, I'm sorry, to the PC tab, you'll see that none of the pings went through again, right? So we've pinged that address again, none of the pings succeeded, and we notice that that violation counter continues to increment. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at that last mode. We're going to say switch port security violation protect. So we saw what shutdown did. It put the port in a down state and air disabled the port. To bring it back up, we had to do shut and then no shut. Excuse me. And then we took a look at restrict, where restrict did not put the port in a down state. In fact, it leaves it in an up state. However, no traffic is allowed to transit the port that doesn't correspond to the MAC address, to that static secure MAC address that we've defined. So now we're going to say protect. So switch port security violation protect, and let's see the behavior of this. So we're going to come over here and we're going to say shut and then no shut. Now I don't have to do this, but I want to get a clean state here. So I'm going to take it down and then bring it back up. and let's see what happens. So you see we get the change state to administratively down. When we did our shut, we do a no shut. It says change state to up. So do show run interface Ethernet 01. Let's make sure we look good here, right? So there it is, switch port, port security, violation, protect. But are we seeing any error messages, right? Or I should say any log messages. There's no log messages coming up to the screen, right? And this may give the impression that, oh, okay, well, protect is going to allow that traffic to go. Well, let's say do show port security interface E01 and take a look here. So a little bit different, right? So enabled, it shows it's secure and up. So the only time it says secure shutdown is when we've got the shutdown status. What's our violation mode? Violation mode is protect. We've got one MAC address maximum, total of 1 shows up, and configured as a single address. This again is the last address in VLAN 1 that we've seen on this port. Now, what happens if I say, what happens if we say do show port security? So you can see it just simply lists out that single port again, and take a look. The security violation count is 0, right? Whereas before, the count was not only incrementing with restrict, but with shutdown, it showed us that, yeah, you had 1, and then, the port got shut down. So very interesting here. Protect doesn't do anything. So this could give you the impression that, oh, well, then that must mean that protect is going to allow the traffic to go through. Well, let's give it a try here. Let's see what happens. So on PC1, we're going to say ping 192.168.0.163. And no, none of those pings are going to function. So again, it comes down to the use case that you're interested in, and the level of scrutiny and alarming that you would like to have when there's a port security violation. So we've seen all three. The first is protect, right? In terms of, in terms of protection, it's not going to allow the traffic to pass like we just saw. However, it doesn't even generate a message. Not even when traffic tries to go through, you can see here, not even when traffic tries to go through, do we get a message telling us, hey, you've got a port security violation here. So protect would simply be, hey, if it's not the MAC address that I've coded in there or we've learned through dynamic or sticky means, then traffic's just not going to be allowed. However, I'm not going to shut the port down, and I'm going to allow things to continue on. Then we took a look at restrict, where restrict is very much like protect, except restrict is going to increment the counter, right? The violation counter. It's also going to generate a log message for us so that we can see, hey, we've had a port security violation. And then we've got the most restrictive of all, and that is shutdown, right? Where shutdown is going to say that as soon as we sense that there's been a port security violation, that port is going to be placed in an air-disabled state. It will be down, and it's going to take, by default, it will take administrator intervention to get in there to take a look to see what has happened. So I personally like using shutdown because if you've got port security configured, think about it like this. If you have port security configured, it's configured for a reason. And chances are, if someone plugs a device in that's not supposed to be plugged in to a specific port where you've configured port security, you would probably want to know about that, right? You would want to get a log message. You would want the port to be shut down, or I guess in the shutdown state, right? Air disabled state in the shutdown mode. That way you can stop and take a look and see, well, wait a minute, what got plugged in here? What's going on this port? If you didn't care about it, you just simply wanted to make sure that traffic from a non-static, dynamic, or sticky learned MAC address didn't go through, then you could do protect, right? And then restrict is middle of the road, where you're going to get a log message, but it's not going to down the port. All right, so now let's talk about that sticky learning, right? So we're in the port here, so we're going to say switch port, port security, MAC address. If I do a question mark, you can see we've got two options here. We've got the static secure configuration, where I would put in a 48-bit MAC address, and then we have a sticky secure. Now, dynamic secure is going to be the default, which is where the switch is simply going to learn, if I didn't hard code it in there, whatever I plug in that's dynamically learned, that's going to be the MAC address that gets used. However, keep in mind, you're probably wondering, well, wait a second, you just told me that sticky is going to dynamically learn the address, and so is dynamic. So what's the difference there? Well, remember, dynamic is going to dynamically learn off the first frame that comes in out of that layer 2 header source MAC address field, what's my address? Then you've got sticky, and sticky is going to do the same thing. However, sticky will show up in the running config, whereas dynamic will not. So actually, let's do this. If I were to say do show run interface Ethernet 01, let's prove this out here. So I'm going to say no switch port, port security, MAC address, and we'll do quad A's. There we go. So when I say do show MAC address table dynamic, you can see that we've got nothing listed here for Ethernet 01. So let me come to the PC. Let's kick a ping off, and let's see. Does it ping? It certainly does, right? You see that? So we've got traffic here now. Let me come over here. And I thought we were, yeah, we should be Ethernet 01, or am I? Yeah, PC1, Ethernet 01. So we're good there, but it's interesting, it's not showing. So it's, okay, right. So we've got port security on there, so it had it in there as a static. So let's do this. Let's say clear MAC address table dynamic. All right, so we're going to clear the MAC address. Let me ping again here. And we've got switch port, port security on, but we've got nothing listed there. So when I say show run interface Ethernet 01, you can see, it did not take the MAC address off. And so that's interesting. Let's go back into global config interface, and I'm wondering if we're running into a IOU. So no switch port, port security, MAC address, quad A's. 01. Excuse me. Okay, it's off of there. Let's see if this is the dynamic learning. Is that it puts it in there, right? So let's kick a ping off. And is it dynamically learning that address? Okay, it's not. So good. So that's what we wanted. So we've got port security, and then we've got switch port violation protect. So we have no MAC address listed here, right? Which means it's going to be dynamic. And that's it's port security is still on, right? So do show run, or actually do show port security. You can see port security is on. It's in the protect mode. And it's also in the dynamic mode, which means whatever got plugged in there, that first frame that we sent with PC1, the switch is saying, oh, okay, that's who's allowed to be on this port because it's dynamic, right? So whoever is plugged in there, that's how it's going to learn. Now, remember I told you the difference between sticky and dynamic is that sticky is going to show up in the running config. We can save it to the startup config, and if we reloaded, that MAC address would still be there. So if I were to say do show run interface Ethernet 01 again, you can see no MAC address listed. Now let's say switch port, port security, MAC address, MAC address sticky. And let's see the difference here. So do show run interface Ethernet 01. And so there we go. We have the sticky command listed there, and it lists out the MAC that it has learned. And that MAC should look familiar. That's the MAC address from the PC, from PC1, which we saw earlier. So now let's see. Can I send traffic to the other PC? Absolutely, right? Because we've got the sticky learning method. The dynamic learning method produced the same result. However, the difference between the dynamic secure address and the sticky secure MAC address is this right here. It's in the running config. So if I said end and write mem, right, I save my configuration, let's say reload. And so IOU loads much quicker, like almost instantaneously than a normal switch. So we say reload, and we'll get our prompt back here in a second. There we go. So we'll go into privilege exec, and let's say show port security. You can see port security still on. It still shows protect. We've got the current address count at 1. The max secure address count is 1. No violations. And now let's say show run interface Ethernet 01. And there it is. It's still in there. If I had dynamic instead of sticky as the port security MAC address option, when you reload, it does not keep the MAC address in the running config, right? Or in the startup config for that matter, which is where you get your running config, right? All right, so that's what we've got in there. So again, this is going to wrap up a good intro and a kind of a review, really, right? If you think about it, the routing and switching, the second Networking Academy CCNA course, Routing and Switching Essentials, really covered port security nicely. And again, we've talked about 3 different types of secure addresses. Static secure MAC address, which we did initially to start the lab. Dynamic secure MAC address, which I kind of did here toward the end, where you just literally, you take off the MAC address argument altogether. And then a sticky secure MAC, which we did right here. We also looked at the different violation modes. We looked at protect, where no message is going to be generated and the port stays up. We looked at restrict, where a log message is going to be generated and the port stays up. And again, in both those cases, if it's not the approved MAC address, right, or the configured MAC address, then or the allowed MAC address, traffic is not going to go across that port. It has to be from the source MAC that you've either sticky learned, dynamically learned, or statically configured. All right. So this wraps up Discovery Activity 17. Again, phenomenal set of 17 discovery activities throughout the entire Cisco Learning Labs curriculum. And this wraps up all of our discovery activities for the semester. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you guys tomorrow night.